Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Song. Thank you so much for ordering 24 Ways to Move More. I'm really excited today because I'm here with Katie Bowman, who is really one of my movement teachers and someone who I've learned so much from. And she's here to be in conversation and to share a little bit more about some of the things I share in the book. And I know that most of you have not read the book yet. So we're going to talk a little bit about movement and the definition of movement and how it really can change and shift your experience of your own body and your energy and your vitality. I want to share a little bit about my experience meeting Katie. So at the time I met her, I thought I knew quite a bit about the body and movement. I had been teaching yoga for several years, and then I had been writing Fit for Life for the Seattle Times for several years. I probably tried like 200 fitness exercise classes by that point. And so I went into meeting Katie thinking, oh, I know a bit. I know what I'm talking about. And then I realized I had so much to learn. And so it's been this really big, deep education. I dove into her books. She's written Move Your DNA and multiple other books around the body and movement. I dove into her podcast. I think I've listened probably to every single podcast, Katie, that you have ever put out. And I really learned so much about the body, and it transformed my experience of movement and actually really informed 24 Ways to Move More quite a bit. So I'm really excited to have you here, Katie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm wondering if you could share, if you could just actually tell people a little bit about yourself first and what you do, and then we can dive into our conversation.
Well, I'm a biomechanist by training, but I'm just like a regular person trying to figure out how to move through life. I'm a parent, a business owner, someone who works a lot. And I think all of those things have equally informed my understanding of movement, not just my education. We always lead with education, but really so much of my approach is from the years after that and really being in a position, literally, we're getting really not only the baseline recommendation of movement, but also the amount of movement that I think is actually required, which is much bigger than the baseline. Like, I really understood how difficult that was once I sort of progressed through my life beyond being someone just at the state of stepping out with your education, being younger. It took me to get over 40 before I really could see the barriers to movement, that I think we'll talk about. That being said, I would say that I teach two things about movement. One, like as far as the overview of movement goes, what I like to teach is movement is a lot bigger than this category of exercise that we tend to think about when we think about movement. If someone says you need to move, we hear you need to exercise. You can take a bunch of classes and you can understand the phenomenon of exercise, but exercise is a really small subcategory of a much larger category of movement. And so I think part of probably the biggest contribution that I've made with what I have done is really just panned out of exercise so people can see the movement beyond exercise that's possible. And then the other thing that I do is, it's like almost like that's like the pan out view of movement. And then I also do the super like drill down, looking at movement like on a joint by joint level, which is to say, hey, you've been taking yoga or this modality of movement, or you're an athlete, you've been doing it for 20 years, but it's no longer working for you. And here's why. You are a totally fit, head to toe active person, but there's like 5 places in your body that don't move at all, that you have sedentary spots within your body. You have cells that are sedentary despite your fitness level. So it's like I'm constantly going between big picture, tiny picture, big picture, tiny picture, because they're actually related, which is because of how narrow we understand movement to be, we don't distribute it well over our bodies. So we tend to move the same small places in our body over and over and over again. And when those get injured, then we're like, well, what's the other exercises I could be or should be doing? And then we pan out like, well, what if you didn't think about exercise as the solution, but this movement that's available to you all the time during your non-exercise time? So they're definitely related, but those are the two worlds that I'm in all the time, helping you with corrective alignment-based movement, but also showing you where movement fits in outside of exercise time. So not only does your whole person move more, but you're able to move more parts of your body throughout the day.
Can you share what the definition of biomechanist is? Because I think a lot of people don't even know exactly what that is too.
Right. Like, what is that? So bio is life, living systems. Mechanics is a branch of physics that deals with like forces and loads and torques and pressures. So I'm someone who studies the mechanics, how physical forces affect living systems. And I have chosen to focus on the human body, but a biomechanist, like there's trees, you can study any living system, forests. There's biomechanists who study whales, so it really, and the equations are the same. It's just how do physical forces affect living systems? And it's not human centric, it's living system centric. And I started out with humans, but now I really kind of work how humans and plants even work together, and how humans affect or limit the migration and movement of other animals, and how the migration of animals affects the movement of humans. And so that's when it gets back to that big scale. But essentially that's what it is. You're just studying the physics of biology.
Yeah, totally. And well, I actually didn't know any of those things about like I always think in my mind biomechanists study the body, but that's good too. Now, now I know more. Now I know more. So I'm curious if for you, so movement transformation is an interest. I'm interested in your movement transformation. I feel like you probably don't have just one, and you probably have one that's more seminal, because I feel like my movement transformation has come over years of a lot of movement changing what I'm doing. But I'm curious if you have one more key moment where you started to see and start to understand and want to shift what was going on in terms of movement in your body and your own life, really.
Yeah, I would say that there's definitely multiple transitions. One of them was, it's probably it's the largest in terms of volume, and that was in college, in graduate school, studying not only the way one type of humans moved, which was mostly North American, Western movement practices. By switching to a cross-cultural perspective, it changed a lot of the assumptions that I had around movement. And that's like the most volumic, because that changed everything going forward. But personally, it was probably going from non-parent to parent, simply with having less time. I had always had really the volume of movement at the time, time was my own. And so I could really choose. And so it was like the fast onset of a loss of time to do the things that I wanted to do. It made no sense to me, because a large part of my theoretical work is humans have always moved a ton. Humans have also always been in family units. Even if they didn't have children, they were still sharing the responsibility of others. And so like the idea that my natural requirement for movement would be so high, and then this other natural thing of like living in a community group, even if my community group was just a family, it not being possible, I couldn't reconcile those two things. And working to reconcile those two things, I think, has been the greatest transformation of the things that we'll talk about, like looking at your environment. Like, what is it about our environment and the way that we've set up our lives and society that makes movement so difficult? So that's it. I mean, it's like everybody,
I mean, essentially being a busy mom.
And I could say like, even like when I became someone who worked, I still felt like the volume of time for me to make my own choices was large. But yeah, it's what a lot of people deal with. Responsibility that's greater than just taking care of yourself, whether it's caretaking a parent, like I've had to be in that phase too. Like our lives have so many responsibilities that aren't taking care of us. So I could make it more universal by saying it's not so much having children, it was having responsibilities beyond taking only care of myself.
And then that switched how you started to think about it, because what's really true, this is how most of us think about it. For those of you who move, or even if you want to or aspire to, you're like, well, I need to take an hour or two each day. And right now, right, a lot of us are working out from home, and still there's like this set time where you can work out and you can't really take care of kids or do other things. I mean, maybe you could bring your kids into class, but there's just this, an exclusive time. And for a lot of people, that's important actually to have that exclusive hour. And what I really learned from Katie is like, well, what about all the other hours you're awake and then you're not moving, you're sitting in front of your Zoom screen or doing whatever else it is, and then starting to learn how to bring more movement in more ways. Is that sort of an accurate summation for you too? It's like, how do you start to expand what movement is outside of this box of exercise that so many of us have had it in?
And really the definition of exercise is that exercise, that movement for the purpose of improving your physical state is the only thing that's happening. So exercise, as it's defined, as it's practiced, as it's explained, doesn't allow you to be getting anything else done. So who's got lots of extra hours where they don't have anything else to do but exercise? A very small percentage of the population. And so as academically or scientifically, as the reviews or the information is coming in about the volume of movement that we actually need, and then, but nothing's changing about, and you have 45 minutes 3 times a week to fit it in, that was a huge problem. Like that was a huge access problem of just understanding what we have now as a society built around not moving, and also everything pointing that you need to move more. Like, what do we do? Like, and so that's where I was like, I will figure this out. I will get this done. And that's what I did. I mean, that's what I'm doing constantly all the time.
So talking about it then that way, right? So obviously I love classes still, and that was like the bulk of what I really did. And I love to take a fitness class. And I'm also always thinking about movement outside of that too. Like, how am I moving my body all the time? And so how do you, for someone who's kind of new to this principle, like how do you start to think about it? How do you start to bring in more movement and ways to even just change how you think about your body throughout the day beyond your hour you might take?
Well, so yes, I mean, I'm also an exerciser. I love exercise. I always have. For me, it's my enjoyable thing, where other people might like playing an instrument for an hour or engaging with knitting for an hour. So for me, exercise is my hobby and my enjoyment. So it's always been easy for me to schedule that hour, where there's a whole group of people for whom it's not enjoyable. So they've always been told to approach it by getting that hour. So my approach is to kind of identify who you are. Are you someone who loves that hour? You've already figured out how to fit it in. You always fit it in, but it's not really meeting your whole person needs. Then it's to like, we're going to look at the other 23 hours as well to show you how you can get that thing that you love even more, even if it's not in an exercise format. But the feeling of moving, you can get that more than just that 1 hour. Or if you're someone who, there is a large group of people who do not identify as movers or exercisers. It doesn't bring them joy. It's always been a point actually of shame. It's always been a shortcoming that's been pointed out by people in their school situation, their parents, their family, their friends. And so that itself is a resistance. Like, I don't want to exercise. It makes no sense to me to move around just for fun. But then when you show them, I'm going to actually show you how you can do the things that you like to do more dynamically, then they glom on to the idea of like, well, I knew I needed to move more. I knew I hated the concept of exercise, but I don't have to exercise to move more. So finding where you sit on the spectrum of someone who sees movement as a hobby, that's really helpful, because all the people teaching movement are usually movers, and they don't necessarily understand that someone wouldn't love it. The idea keeps being, just try it. You'll love it as soon as you get it. Where I think it's more like movement is for every body. Every body has a requirement of movement, but it doesn't have to be done in isolation. It can be done in your relationships, your friendships, your family time, your cooking time, your cleaning time, your creative time, or making time. So it's showing that all of those spaces that you do like to be in can move you more without it ever being exercise. To me, seeing where you fit in that is where you begin.
So I'm now tracking on there. So I fall into the movement as exercise, although I have to say that is not how I've always been. I used to find movement I lived in Alaska. Hiking was miserable,
Mhm.
but I would just do it every year until I got into shape and felt good about it.
Right.
And now for me, it's like I love to schedule out movement, and then I'm always looking at the other places. And so I feel like anyone who's picking up this book is probably wanting to at least add in one or two movements, like they want to try a dance class or do something else.
Mhm.
How would somebody who likes to move just enough that they're going to maybe schedule a couple times a week, how would they start to look at movement in the other parts of their life? Like what would be like a first couple steps to start to look at?
Well, I would say that like what like I have two sort of simple tasks is how much do you sit? Like, can you quantify how much you sit? Because we use pedometers or activity trackers, but they're not really inactivity trackers. Sometimes you have to do that work to see the inactivity. Like we're like, I did 6,000 steps. It's like, but there was also a lot of minutes not moved. So when you start to see that way, then you could be like, well, I have to sit in front of my desk, but maybe I don't have to be so static while I'm doing it. So just like really taking a day or 3 days to pay attention to how much you don't move when you're not move in your non-moving time, that's helpful. And then also, I always say, calculate your chair to butt ratio of your house. Like how many seats do you have in your house for the number of people who live there? Because then you're starting to tune into a sedentary environment. Like we're trained to tune into when we're moving. We're not really trained to tune into when we're not. So it's really an awareness thing of just starting to pay attention. And then you start choosing when you realize you're in a bout of sedentarism, you start thinking about all the same things that you focus on in a bout of movement. Is there a form I could be doing better with my body while I'm sitting here? You know, if you take a dance class or you're weightlifting, I think most people, even if they're new to exercise, have this understanding that form matters, alignment matters. Even if you've just had physical therapy and that's been your movement practice, form always matters. Whether you're exercising or not exercising, you're adapting to form. So simply holding yourself in more an awake and active posture while you're not exercising or not moving is a way of moving more. That's like a really simple one because it doesn't take any more time, just a little bit more mindfulness or awareness. And then also opting for the more dynamic version of whatever non-exercise activity you're going to do. So if you're doing errands, you're thinking about, can I walk and do this? Or if you're sitting down, could I incorporate some of my favorite stretching positions into my seated time? And in that way, what you're doing is you're not adding new activities to your day, but you're adding more activity or more action, more muscle use, body use to the thing that you were already doing anyway. So in that way, movement doesn't require more time.
Right. And I think about too, like even I got a dog a few years ago and like that just made me walk more, right? Like life, there's like certain parts of life that will actually get you to just be more active. And then also too, and I don't know that you can change it like this, but one of the big things that changed things for me is like I just started thinking of walking as movement versus exercise, right? And I think a lot of people have this idea like exercise has to be hard, it has to be intense. And then when you start to actually build in some more things that are happening through the day that are just movement, like sitting on the floor, like I sit on the floor a lot to work, that like, oh, my body is moving, my joints are moving by sitting on the floor rather than sitting in a chair. And that helps my sedentary ratio a little bit, right? And starting to do things like that. If those are things you tend to start to recommend for people, just like looking at some basics.
Yeah, and I think that's part of that exercise definition is when you only move an hour a day, then you're trying to cram it full of as much movement as possible. So you're looking for things where your heart rate is higher, your temperature is higher. You're looking for the big picture, but that need for that really big amount of exertion comes from not doing anything else the rest of the time. So we've started to devalue the 5-minute walk, the one, just a set of 10 squats peppered throughout the day. Now, these are recommendations that fitness magazines and also researchers into metabolic conditions have really recommended. Just increase your physical activity. Don't reach for the blower, get the rake, like do it by hand. watch that everything in your house doesn't become electric so that you actually can move your body around, because those are actually a category outside of exercise called physical activity. So physical activity, which are something else is happening besides only exercising. You're getting your yard work done, your house work done, you're walking to school, you're using active transportation versus just exercise. So the more you can put movement back into the non-exercise parts of your life, that again is called physical activity. And the way you know it's physical activity is more than one thing is happening, which allows you to fit more of it into your life. So you're looking for those opportunities. And also, like, part of that environmental sedentary observation is like, how much automation how much unnecessary automation do I have in my life? And if I got rid of that, could I add some of the movement back in?
Yeah. And when automation being like technology or gadgets or anything, like even a lawnmower, a gas one versus like a push one.
Sure.
That's a significant difference in movement now,
right.
as someone who has to mow my lawn, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And a dryer, like or even if you use your lawnmower instead of paying someone else to mow your lawn for you, right? Like, so right. Like you don't even have to go back to, I'm going to use a scythe to cut my grass. Like you can even keep some of your automation, but we've essentially, the word I use for it is outsourcing. We have outsourced all of our movement to gadgets or other people, and are sitting here in this lack of movement crisis going like, what do I do? It's like, just start reining that back in a little bit. Start taking some of your movement responsibility back, but do it in a joyful way, because you're getting the thing that you wanted, right? Chores, no one likes to do chores because they keep you from doing what you would rather be doing. But I had you just fill out this form and you said you wanted more movement. So by doing the chore, you're also actually getting the thing that you wanted. It just didn't come in the package that you were expecting.
Totally. I always think about that. Like, I don't really like taking out like the garbage cans, for example.
Sure.
And I know I'm like, oh, I'm getting some steps.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And some pulls and some pushes. You know what I mean? Like, it's always so much more fun when we can go to the class to get our pulls and pushes of a sandbag or something, like we are spending a lot of time lifting things that don't have to go anywhere, pushing and pulling stand-ins for actual items. And we feel good about that, but we don't feel good about actually picking things up that need to go to a place and taking them there. And I'm very interested in that phenomenon. Like, what is that all about?
Totally. Well, one of the things I'd love to hear, and I don't think you and I have actually ever talked about this, and Katie and I have done a couple of 20-mile walks, so we've had many hours where we've chatted extensively. Right. But what about like the fun piece of it? So one of the big things with this book is like making it fun. Like, that's one of the big things I learned, was like taking on new movements, trying different things was actually really fun. Like, at first I really would feel like, oh my God, I have to go take this new class and I don't know if I really want to. But where does that come in for you around movement? Like, making it fun, or if it already is inherently fun for you, like how does fun sort of fall onto the spectrum for you when you think about it?
Fun for me is challenging myself to do something that I didn't think I could do. Like, I enjoy the process of sort of overcoming my own perceived limitations. I enjoy being, I don't like looking silly, probably like everyone else, and I think that's what would keep us from trying something new or different. It's like, I don't want to get out there and fail in front of everybody. But I feel like allowing myself to fail regularly, that failing is really just a point of view. Like, showing up, you've already not failed. Doing half of it, you've already not failed. And so it's fun for me to step sort of out of my comfort zone. And when I'm done, I've never regretted it. Like, I've never, ever gone to I remember I am not, I like certain types of dance, but I'm not a dancer. But I thought it would be challenging to go try an adult ballet class, and I was not good at it at all. But I was just like laughing at myself being there and doing the thing. And that was fun. And then also, I find this is kind of a strange time to talk about it a little bit, but I think that movement and exercise both have a very large, can have a very large community component. And that is fun. I think that we are social creatures that need to be moving in a collection and like struggling to get something together and figure it out. And to me, exercise is almost like exercise classes especially are like this sort of stand in for doing that as a group, even if you don't know everyone that you came with. And it's like, we're all going to try to learn this routine together. We're all going to try to like row this boat to that place. And you're laughing because you're so out of sync. And that to me is fun. It's like humanity. It's watching everybody do that. And so that's why I think I like exercise, why I like teaching it. I've always liked to teach community classes where groans are encouraged and falling over is celebrated, because like if it was easy, you wouldn't have to do it. Like if it was easy, it wouldn't have value. It wouldn't have nearly the value it has when it's hard. So that's, the struggle is fun for me.
I mean, I'm a fan, and I love that, right? That was a huge part of the growth for me, was trying new things and being okay with being bad.
And my sister, she has this group of friends, and what they do is they take turns picking out the class. It's always a movement experience or class, picking it out for everyone else, and everyone has to go no matter what. Like they're all in, and they don't know where they're going until they get there. If there's gear that's required, and they all show up and they're like, surprise, you're at a ropes course. Surprise, you're in a belly dancing class. Surprise, we're doing like a 10K. Like it doesn't matter. You have to do it however you can. And they build their relationships through doing this. And I'm like, it's just such it's such a great thing to do with a group of people, even if you're like collectively doing something online or looking for some outside experience. Like I think that these community building, I mean, they use movement for a lot of community building. Corporations will always go to some sort of challenging movement thing. So just do it yourself. Pick a class, pick an experience, and go for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Is it a club, or there's their own little group that they just do?
There's just a group of friends. It's like 7 or 8, 55, 60-year-old women, and that's what they do.
Well, maybe you'll inspire some people to start some groups themselves to do that. And that's really the intention of the book. It's like, try some new stuff. Go roller skating. Go jump on a trampoline if your knees are good, right? Like just do something fun for yourself, and then make movement, find the movement. To me, that's the big thing. It's like, find the movement that's fun, and then it'll be a lot easier to do it. And then over time, you kind of build the muscle of like, all right, I'm just gonna be bad at some stuff. I mean, that was it to me. It's like the movement life can actually be a really fun one. And it's one that can be really rich and expansive. And it doesn't have to feel like, I think that's the part of it that I really got from my column. And then doing and diving into the work with you is like, oh, movement can just be really natural and part of life, and it can be really fun versus something you have to do. Because I experienced that from a lot of people. It's like, I have to do that. Like, I got to do it. Oh God, it's like such a burden. Instead of being like, well, you know what I'm going to do is like 3 5-minute walks today, and that's it. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. And then over time you build off of that, and then you start to try new things. Like I take tap dance and I'm awful at it, but I love it. And so just starting to just challenge yourself out of those things, and then build in movement in lots of different ways in your life. And then you're like, oh, like it's just actually being human.
Well, to me, a movement-rich life is a joyful life. Because when you add more movement back in, like I said, you're exchanging more of your own physicality for the things in your life. And there's a sense of satisfaction that, I mean, if you come to your yard, I'll use a yard as an example. Not everyone has a yard. Not everyone has someone taking care of their yard. But if you have a garden, like if someone else did all that work for you, you could enjoy the beauty of what it is. But there is a sense of satisfaction that comes from the exertion of using your body in exchange for the thing that you get. And so it's really just about maximizing how you feel about some things, because it's like a longer period of time. It's in your arms and your legs and your trunk as you're doing all these things. So to show that moving more in your life isn't a burden, it's more joy, I think is a shocker for people, because they just assume that it's a slog. And it's not. It's the opposite of a slog. Or maybe there's a version of a joyful slog that we just don't know yet. It's not easy, but if you look at research on kids and how kids build up their self-esteem and how they feel, it's about working hard for something, not just being not having everything handed to them in that way. So if we just think of movement as that same thing, it's like movement is a balm for lots of things.
For sure. I always think if like I'm in the middle of a hard hike and I'm kind of like, I want the hike to be over because it's still so hard right now. And it's so intense. And then I remember that at the end, it will feel so great because I put in so much effort. But in the moment, sometimes it feels like, oh, this is so hard. And then I had to just remind myself, I'm like, it's not about that. Just be where you are and then have fun, try to have fun while you're doing it. And at the end, it is so rewarding. It's like absolutely so rewarding.
Well, it's important to normalize that, because I think if you go, when you're starting movement and you go to a class or do something and you're like, I am struggling so much more, I hate this, everyone else seems to like it. And it's like, no, we're just used to hating it. Like, we're used to enduring it. And when you get used to the discomfort or the practice of enduring, then your face looks more relaxed. But everyone is going like, really? How many more minutes? Where's the clock? Right? Like, because part of the onset of your system working hard is it looking to stop. Like, that's just a natural phenomenon. So if that feels like you listening, like we've all been there and we're all there regular, like you're in good company.
For sure. Well, Katie, thank you so much for chiming in and sharing your thoughts with readers and everyone. And, we're really all here to help people move more. So I appreciate it. And you have really transformed my movement in so many ways. And so I'm so grateful for you. So thank you for being with us today.
Congratulations on your new book. I can't wait.
Thank you, Katie.